One of the most urgent tasks of our country is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. This is the best day of the week. Not just because the weekend is almost here, but because this is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm Executive Vice President of the Heartland Institute. We are an organization that has been around for 42 years, and we are known as the leading global think tank pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland and this show bringing the data, the science, the truth that counters the climate alarmist narrative you've been fed every day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere. So I hope you will bring friends to view this live stream every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And also like, share, and subscribe. And be sure to leave your comments under the video. These all help convince YouTube's very mysterious algorithm to smile upon this program. And that gets the show in front of even more people. And as a reminder, because big tech and the legacy media are not big fans of the way we cover climate and energy policy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support this program, and I really hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS, or you can scan this code right here on the screen. And that way you can join other friends of this program who help bring this show to the world every single week. We also want to thank our streaming partners before we get started. JunkScience.com, CFACT, What's Up With That, the CO2 Coalition, and Heartland UK Europe. We have another big show today, so let's get started. We have with us, as usual, Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and publisher of the world's most viewed website on climate change, What's Up With That? Sterling Burnett, the Archbishop of Ranterbury, whose day job is the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate for Climate Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. Linnea Lucan, who's a research fellow and a video star, and she's a research fellow for energy and environment policy at Heartland. And also thank you to Andy Singer, our producer in the background, making sure everything looks and flows great. And we're very happy to welcome special guest Kevin Mooney. Kevin is a friend of Heartland. He's also a longtime journalist and author of a new book that we're going to talk about in a bit. Welcome to the show, Kevin. I know you're a big fan, and it's great to finally have you on.
Oh, likewise. I've enjoyed this program for such a long time. It's great to be here, so appreciate you having me.
Great. We'll get to you in a little bit on the program, but right now, since we have so much to pack in here, let's start off, as we always do, with the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. Thank you, Bill Nye, the best unpaid contributor to this program we could ever hope for. All right, our first item today comes from The Guardian in the UK. The headline is, Trump has launched an unprecedented assault on the environment. Where's the pushback? We saw the story this week, and I gotta say, it made us smile, certainly made me smile, especially since the lead of the story features our friend and frequent guest on this program, Mark Morano of CFACT, and it also cites this very Heartland Institute. Let me read a little bit for you. It's pretty good. As Donald Trump assaults the legal foundation of America's ability to regulate global warming emissions, climate deniers have been privately celebrating what they claim is the silent acquiescence of billionaires, Democrats, climate activists, and even reporters to the president's aggressive pro-fossil fuel agenda. Quote, in my 26 years of being focused on climate, I've never seen anything like this. Trump is gutting everything they ever stood for, said Mark Morano, longtime climate denier, said at the World Prosperity Forum, a 5-day event in Zurich, Switzerland, billed as a right-wing alternative to the World Economic Forum in Davos. By the way, that was an event put on by the Heartland Institute. As they mentioned, the event sponsor was the Heartland Institute, a conservative think tank that has been at the forefront of spreading climate disinformation for decades, and was also a contributor to Project 2025, the policy blueprint for Trump's second administration. Quote, billionaires are silent. Democrats in Congress have been silent. Climate activists. There's been no pushback on this, Morano said. And he may have a point, according to some experts who research the climate denial movement. Quote, the Trump administration just marched in and destroyed the crown jewel of climate science in the United States, said Robert Brule, a professor of environment and society at Brown University, referring to the Trump administration's dismantling of the country's premier climate research center, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, in December. We covered that on the show a while back. Quote, and nothing happened. There wasn't even a whimper. I never thought I'd ever say this. Mark Morano is correct, unquote. You hear that, Mark? I know you're watching the show. Maybe hell has actually frozen over. Quote, Trump overturned Biden's climate agenda at breakneck speed, Morano said at the Heartland Institute's Zurich Forum. Instead of pushing back on this blitz, many Democratic Party representatives have retreated from talking directly about the climate crisis across social media, podcasts, speeches, and in Congress. The party is now embroiled in a debate about whether affordability is a better message than climate action. Now, the story then goes on to quote our buddy Sheldon Whitehouse, who is irritated by what he calls climate hushers in his party. But there are no signs that it's having any impact. I know it's been a while, but let me close this out by noting just this bit more from the story. At Davos in January, world leaders across business and government talked noticeably less about addressing climate change than in previous years. Why? Quote, in today's deeply polarizing U.S. political stance, climate discussion has come to feel so radioactive that many leaders would rather avoid it, said Anjali Chaudhary, a business sustainability researcher at Dominican University, actually wrote that in Forbes. Even the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who once served as a United Nations Secretary General's special envoy for climate action and finance, limited his mentions of climate change at Davos just a few weeks ago to a quiet reference to the COP climate summit and a simple, quote, Canadians remain committed to sustainability. Finally, Robert Brule, as we mentioned before, at Brown University said, quote, I think the climate movement in the United States has failed. It has flat failed. And that means we need to rebuild this movement in a completely different manner, unquote. All right, thank you for your patience. Sterling, this story tries to hang on to some hope by referencing biased and shaky polls that say 89% of the public wants climate action. Robert Brule says that the climate panic industrial complex has to rebuild this movement. Bluetooth that means it's been destroyed, and it only took a new president 1 year to do it.
Well, you know, there's much to like about this Guardian story and much to dislike. You know, the idea that Trump is dismantling environmental protection as opposed to getting rid of illegal environmental regulations and counterproductive environmental regulations that cause more harm, environmental harm, than they ever could have benefited the environment. You know, that's just misrepresentation. But that's typical for the Guardian. It is lovely and accurate to see these guys in retreat. I'm not convinced that they failed in the sense that for 20 years now, we've been wasting trillions of dollars on climate matters. We have been directing people's choices in appliances, in automobiles. You know, they've had an effect. They've had an effect in limiting freedom, which is what these guys are really about. The fact that we're now reversing this and they are silent or virtually silent about it. Remember, they are challenging the endangerment finding in court, but Dems aren't rushing to the bulwarks to defend all this kind of stuff because, like it says, they're worried about affordability. Now, what they mean by affordability is more of the same. Let's be honest. New Jersey's governor won on affordability. And the first thing she did was, and Virginia's governor did the same thing. The first thing Virginia's governor did is take them back into the RGGI, which is costly. That increased the price of energy in Virginia, and yet they say, oh, this is going to save you money. Well, that's what they said before, and it didn't. What it did was raise costs. New Jersey's governor is the same. they're blaming high prices on the fact that offshore wind has been stalled. Well, offshore wind was one of the reasons prices went up. All the costs that were ladled on in advance for these turbines, them ending natural gas shipments, blocking pipelines. So basically, they're doubling down the same policies, but the different messaging. For Democrats, it's always the message, not the action. And so I think the affordability crisis is still going to come back and bite them when after a few years, prices keep rising despite, it's amazing to me. These people have been in charge in New York. New York's the same thing. Hochul said, we got to get rid of these climate goals that we set. Why? We told them in advance it was going to cost them more. They said it was going to be cheaper. Gee, who was right? We were. And yet her solution is to double down on that and now build a new nuclear plant north and import energy from Canada rather than reopening a plant that's not too far from New York City, which they closed while she was lieutenant governor. It's nice that they're on the defensive. I don't think they've gone away, and we'll see what happens after Trump is no longer president. They may come roaring back, or they may move on to plastics. I don't know.
Yeah, plastics. One word, plastics.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, Anthony, the great thumbnail that Donald Kendall made for us for this is kind of based on this story and just kind of the theme that after having so much power for so many years over culture, over Hollywood, over politics, over finance, over all global organizations, really, were they paper tigers all along and we just gave them too much credit?
I kind of think they were. I mean, there was not a lot of substance to the whole climate change cabal. It was all speculation. It was all about models, and the predictions that they made about things happening never came true. And that's their biggest fallacy. It goes all the way back to 1989 with the UN saying, entire nations are going to disappear under the seas due to climate change caused sea level rise. Well, of course, that never happened. And then, you go to Al Gore saying things like, ice free by 2013. Oh, no, I meant ice free by 2015. Oh, no, wait, by 2018, that kind of stuff. And then there was, ice is going to disappear from the top of Mount Kilimanjaro and all these different predictions that they keep making, which fell flat. And then they kept pushing the goalpost out 10 years, well, we really meant 2035, not 2025, and so their credibility was constantly taking a hit all through the process. And so, yeah, they started out as paper tigers and they ended up looking like fools.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Kevin, we are all, we're of a generation that remembers the Cold War. I actually, when reading this and getting ready for the show, it reminds me of, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of communism, to be honest. I mean, there were whole courses of study, or you could major in Soviet studies at prestigious universities in this country until about 1994, 1993. And then that was moot. And there was this idea that the Soviet Union was as strong as the United States, or probably stronger if you listen to certain people. And then suddenly it just all went away. And the truth was, it was always kind of fake. It was a Potemkin society. And I think the climate alarmism cabal and control was the same. What do you think?
Yeah, I think in many respects. Also, I think I like the Berlin Wall analogy because if you go back and look at that history, a lot of the former communists ended up inside the Green parties in Europe, keeping that same. So the ideology never went away. It was repackaged and remarketed. So unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to be at a movement that has this collectivist, centralized planning bent. They're just going to call it by different names.
Yep. Well, it's the old cliche, climate alarmism is green on the outside and red on the inside, like a watermelon. So, all right, let's move on to our second item. This is a lot of fun, and this comes from What's Up With That? What do you know? Headline is Stop the War because Global Warming. Actually, this is a citation from something called Covering Climate Now, which I can tell you only exists because of millions of dollars donated by leftist climate alarmists with deep pockets. Good news is that funding is probably going to be coming to an end soon, as we noted in our first item. But as of right now, they are paid to put out this kind of garbage. I don't know if you have this on the screen, Andy, but there was a a dear colleague letter saying, join us Thursday, March 5th, that was yesterday, for a rapid response webinar on the Iran war and climate change, plus upcoming webinars about the ethics of AI and climate journalism and the popularity of global climate action. And they wanted people to show up and RSVP for it. So let me read a little bit from it. War makes climate change worse in many ways and vice versa. The U.S.-Israel attacks on Iran that began over the weekend have killed hundreds of civilians and sent oil prices soaring. But this war also promises to unleash massive amounts of planet-warming gases at a time when civilization is already hurtling toward irreversible climate breakdown. Not every story about the Iran war needs to make the climate connection, but climate change is essential context if the public and policymakers are to understand the full dimensions of this conflict. Join Covering Climate Now and a panel of experts for a discussion about the geopolitical and climate implications of the war on Iran, which has one of the world's largest oil reserves. Anthony, well, that does it. You know, all we need to do to save the planet is to turn to global climate communism, destroy all of our economies, and also achieve world peace so that no more wars break out. Uh-oh, Anthony, I went to you. Are you not hearing it? Uh-oh.
Well,
anyway.
Maybe Linnea wants to speak to this. I have some thoughts too.
Okay.
Well, I think Anthony heard you that time.
Nope.
Or maybe not.
I'm unconvinced.
Yeah, I heard you. I'm here.
Okay.
I was doing some research. Sometimes I get clickety clack over here, and my earring cuts out because with a hearing impairment, I have to dedicate either all my mental resources to hearing or all my mental resources to something else. It's an on-off switch kind of a thing. So, thank you for your patience. But what was the question?
Well, I mean, it seems like, you know, all we need to do to save the planet is to achieve world peace so that no more wars break out. I mean, of all the things to have an angle to cover the Iran war, and climate is the one that's really important.
Well, I will say this, you know, there have been studies made about World War II and how much it, you know, contributed to carbon dioxide and so forth. And, you know, most of them were inconclusive, mainly because there was no good monitoring back then. But secondly, it really didn't make a whole big difference in the scheme of things. You know, wars are dirty, ugly, nasty, and climate change is none of those things. Climate change is very gradual. And so, you know, so what? We produce a little more CO2. It's a micro blip in the scheme of things. It doesn't even show up in the Keeling carbon dioxide curve. You know, when you look at the Gulf War that happened, you know, and some of these other outbreaks of war, you can't even see them in the record. So their whole premise of worrying about the blip in CO2 is just preposterous.
I find it disturbing that people like this, when people are really dying on the ground as we speak, bodies are burning, infrastructure being destroyed, lives are disrupted and overturned, and they're worried about CO2 emissions and their impact on the environment, which they say is, you know, spiraling out of control, civilization spiraling out of control. I remember when John Kerry butted his in on the under Biden and Trump on the under Biden on Ukraine and Russia, and he says, while this is going on, let's not forget the climate impact of this. Let's, you know, we've got to stop this war because of climate change. Look, I think the people on the ground, the people fighting the war, and the people of the earth in general have more things to worry about with regards to these war than a possible blip in CO2. And honestly, I think they're just being hypocritical. For decades now, they have fought oil and gas use. We have basically stopped oil shipments to Cuba, and none of them are praising the fact that Cuba has now gone being forced to be net zero. They're not praising that. They're saying, let the oil in, and oil is not coming out of the Middle East. Prices have gone up, which means people, you know, under economics, people probably use less. That means less burning, so emissions should decline. And yet they're decrying this war as opposed to saying, yes, we need more wars because that stops oil use. It's they're hypocritical and they're stupid. At the same
Well,
time, I guess you can be both.
it really highlights just how bad, or rather, non-existent, their ability to do like a natural cost benefit analysis or a natural kind of like weighing of importance on issues the climate cabal has. Because you look at a war where people are dying, cities are being destroyed, all sorts of stuff is being destroyed, and to a normal person, that immediate issue is the only issue that they are particularly concerned with, right? But the same goes when it comes to trying to calculate what to do about climate change long term, right? They say, well, we just need like global communism, and we need to switch over to all intermittent resources in order to fix climate change. And as a story that we have upcoming in a little bit here, we need to stop using air conditioning to fix climate change. Like these are things that to a normal person doing this like cost benefit analysis, they would say, this doesn't make any sense. Why would I do this to stop a decimal of a degree of warming over the next 50 years, even if it would work? It doesn't, the math doesn't math there at all. And so these people are just, they're just hammers, right? The only thing that Covering Climate Now has is climate change. So they have to make every single thing about climate change.
Well, it shows they have no moral compass. They don't care about actual human lives, but future possible human lives. But more importantly, I think they're right about one thing. If you have global communism, you'll have fewer emissions because lots of people will die. Look at the Soviet Union, look at Cambodia under Pol Pot, look at all these places where communism, until modified with market mechanisms like has been done in Vietnam and China, killed millions and millions and millions of people. And emissions coming out of North Korea aren't very high. If we all went to North Korea, emissions would fall because people would die, and they would be, and that's what they really want, is they want to be in control of people's lives. They've stated honestly, human population is too high. That's why global communism, it's not about peace, or if it is, it's about peace inherits Earth 6 feet deep.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, we can maybe wrap with you here. It brings to mind. I know you're familiar with Patrick Moore as well, the co-founder of Greenpeace, and
Sure.
he joined Greenpeace as a Canadian to save the whales, and then after a few years, he looked around and realized he was surrounded by radicals who were literally anti-human. They hated humanity and wanted it gone, and that came to mind while reading this story today.
Yeah, well, at its bottom, it's an anti-human, anti-population movement. Malthusianism is the phrase that's used to really capture this ideology. So with the war in Iran, I was waiting for them to drop the mask and just say, "Hey, this is great. We need more wars, less CO2 emissions, and fewer people." I mean, that if you wanted to continue with the logic that they're using, but I think that's what you really got to look at right from the beginning. This was a movement aimed at the idea that humanity is a blight to the planet.
Yep. 100%. All right, let's move on to a story that Linnea just hinted at, and this is the AC climate doom loop apparently happens. So this is from Time Magazine. New study finds air conditioners will exacerbate climate change as planet warms. As global temperatures rise, the very thing we turn to keep ourselves cool could be a significant contributor to increased emissions and even a warmer planet. A new study published today in the journal Nature Communications estimates that by 2050, air conditioning use is expected to more than double as more people turn to air conditioning to stay cool amidst rising temperatures, contributing significantly to expected greenhouse gas emissions. What's more, as incomes rise in developing countries and more low and medium income regions achieve the same access to AC as high income regions, we could see an additional 0.015 degrees Celsius to 0.05 degrees Celsius warming by 2050. This rise could create what the researchers call a feedback loop, in which closing the inequality gap and improving access to air conditioning would put global climate targets out of reach. Regions most vulnerable to rising temperatures, such as South Asia and Africa, currently have the least access to air conditioning. In contrast, wealthier regions like Europe and North America have lower cooling needs but higher air conditioning usage. So, for the sake of a projected measly hundredth of a degree or so in the next 24 years, the poor are just going to have to do without. Linnea, we just can't have nice things, right? That's the eternal motto of the climate.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to reassure everyone, using air conditioning and the expanded use of air conditioning in the third world is not going to cause runaway global warming doom feedback loop. It's a ridiculous proposition. And I want to point this out. That study in Nature Communications is from I believe the Beijing University, Beijing Institute of Technology, which is a CCP founded and run university. So this is the Chinese Communist government saying the West should not be using as much of their traditional air conditioning, and like refrigerants and stuff. The third world doesn't have enough of it. They should be buying more of it, and the West should use less of it, is what the study was promoting, largely. Although they also were very negative on the third world increasing their use of electricity in general. So this is the Chinese government, which again dominates many of these industries for alternative refrigerants, saying the West needs to buy more alternative refrigerants. It's completely absurd. It's completely exhausting.
Let's go back to air chillers.
We're going to use swamp coolers from now on everywhere, no matter where they don't work.
Yeah, Linnea is right. The absurdity of this article, but not just the absurdity. They themselves admit, what was it? 0.05% or something like that by 2050. In other words, something that's not measurable by most thermometers, and certainly not felt temperature increase by any person. If you tell me it's going to be 95 today, but next week it'll be 95.005 degrees more, I'm not going to notice the difference, folks. But the hypocrisy of this is apparent. They're telling us to use less as they actively add air conditioning. I think they doubled air conditioning over the past 10 years in China. Every one of the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party has air conditioning in their office buildings and at their homes. But I think in part what they're trying to do is tamp down the aspirations of their large rural population that they should have air conditioning. They want them to be the patriots and sacrifice. You don't need what we have. It would only hurt the planet. You're going to be the climate heroes, as they try and also torque the West and get them to stop using air conditioning. In the end, it's not that developing countries are clamoring for air conditioners because the temperature is going up. It's that they are clamoring for air conditioning because they want to live like us and they're becoming wealthier. Climate change is not driving air conditioner adoption. Wealth is driving it. And who wouldn't be in favor of wealth? Well, I'll tell you who. The watermelons in the climate movement.
I would say that the whole idea of using air conditioning causing additional global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it is simply a bunch of hot air.
There you go.
All right. Thank you very much, Anthony.
or you're throwing cold water on air conditioning.
Yeah. Well, we'll let you put a bow on this one for us, Kevin. Inherent in all of these stories, and Linnea just talked about it, is how, we in the West and we in wealthy nations have been able to build this society and live well, have air conditioning if we live in hot areas. And they're just, what is this obsession with the climate movement to keep people in poorer countries poor and miserable as long as possible?
It is about controlling people, but it's also about their own elitism. Nobody suffers more from climate change policies than the populations they claim to champion. if you take a look at it carefully. It's the most vulnerable countries, most vulnerable populations trying to raise their living standards that have the most to lose. I mean, energy is the great enabler of higher living standards. So I guess give them credit in terms of how they know how to achieve their goals. They're aiming their arrow right where it hurts the most, affordable energy.
Yep.
There's,
Renee, go ahead.
yeah. There's also one interesting thing that I found, because we covered this in Climate Realism. There's one interesting kind of comparison for those in the audience who maybe aren't convinced that global air conditioning use doesn't destroy the planet. But that's that all air conditioning use on the planet contributes about 3% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Eliminating that would be about the same amount, probably a bit less than what was eliminated during the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of emissions. And you can look up the atmospheric carbon dioxide measurements at Mauna Loa from that period, and there is not a blip of change in the trajectory of increasing carbon dioxide emissions from that period. Not a blip. And cutting AC would have less of an impact than, the entire, transportation industry shutting down for almost a year, So it's completely absurd.
Look, Linnea, if you don't want to reduce the global temperature 25 years from now by 0.015 degrees, I mean, I just think you're anti-human. You just don't like people. There's just something wrong with you.
I think it's actually, 0.003 degrees too, at the maximum 0.05 degrees. So
yeah,
she's just a misanthrope. We all know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and as either Anthony or Sterling had pointed out, this is it's not measurable. It really isn't. And these are just projections. It's complete nonsense. So that's why this show is here, to root that stuff out, to have you better understand it. All right, last item here before we get on to talking with our guest about his new book, Somali Fraud and Climate. This comes from the lefty New Republic. Headline is Somali immigrants fled climate change. Now they're facing ICE. Oh boy, this is pretty rich. Here we go. In Somali culture, I'm going to try to say this. In Somali culture, there's a famous adage, Kalaf wa labo kagud. It translates to happiness is 2 feet and denotes deep-rooted traditions of movement and migration. Somalis have been caught in civil war and unrest for decades, and many have migrated to Kenya, Ethiopia, Europe, and the United States. For months, Trump has denigrated Somalis and Somalia. In December, he went on a racist tirade, calling Somalia, quote, the worst country in the world, where people, quote, run around killing each other, and calling Somali-born Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar garbage. The Trump administration then began targeting the Somali American community in Minnesota and Maine with immigration and custom enforcement raids. But what Trump and the political discourse focused on the conflict-driven migration out of Somalia misses is the pervasive role of climate change in people's decisions to move both in and out of Somalia. Persistent drought, made 100 times more likely due to warming caused by fossil fuel emissions, is affecting Somali people's decisions to either relocate internally or migrate across international borders. Not surprisingly, the setup by the New Republic here leaves out the billions in fraud carried out by the Somali community in Minnesota, which is why they are being targeted right now, and that's just scratching the surface. Kevin, you're a journalist. Can you confirm to us that climate refugees actually exist?
No, they don't really exist. It's mostly about a financial racket in one form or another, which is what the whole climate movement was really about from the beginning. So it's a false cooked up narrative.
I would point out that a few years ago, the UN had posted a prediction, I think it was somewhere around 2002 or 2003, that there would be 50 million climate refugees by 2010. And they had this up on their website. They believed it, and then as 2010 got closer and closer, they quietly disappeared it. And we caught that on What's Up With That and shamed them for that. But, none of that's ever happened. It just goes along with the whole set of things that I talked about before. They make all these predictions that don't come true. and then they have egg on their face and look like idiots. And that's what happened.
Look, there's been some international court cases, and even international courts that are favorable to climate alarm have said they can't identify a single refugee from climate change. And the truth of this story, leave aside their rhetoric about Trump or the crackdown, it opened with sort of the recognition that the thing that's driving things in Somalia and in a lot of other places is war, is strife, and poverty, persistent poverty due to bad institutions in those countries. They don't have property rights. They don't have governments that aren't explicitly corrupt, just siphoning off the aid that is sent to them. That's what's driving this immigration, both to the U.S. and in the region. Do they have drought? Sure, they have drought. They've always had drought off and on. Is it persistent? And by which I mean, is there a long-term trend for drought in Somalia? There's not. That's what would indicate climate change. Short-term droughts are not climate change. Is there a persistent, other conditions, extreme weather events in Somalia that are suddenly changing that never happened before? It turns out there are no long-term trends for that. So any supposed climate connection is non-existent. And there are terrible things going on in Somalia and around the world, but there's a song, 99 Problems, but my girlfriend's not one. They used a different word. They did. And this is it. Somalia's got 99 problems, but climate change ain't one.
Yeah. This is another article that I covered for Climate Realism, but it hasn't gone up on the website yet. And I also covered it a bit on X this morning just because I found it so funny. It's one of the funniest headlines I've seen in a while, just because it's, again, so ignorant of what the actual issue is. And in fact, one of my favorite things about this article, whoops, I disappeared off camera. Can you hear me though?
Yeah. You can.
All right, that's fine, I guess. We'll see what happens there. Anyway, one of my favorite things about this article is that, it's the framing is basically, Somalia has all these issues, but no one is considering this tiny thing that has basically no relevance. And towards the end of the article, they quote a Somali scholar and geographer from the University of Minnesota, ironically enough, who says, and I quote, "Drought does not necessarily lead to famine and does not necessarily lead to migration." And they just completely ignore this quote that they included in their paper or in their article. And they just keep pushing it anyway, because I guess the thesis of this article is that climate change induced drought is causing Somalians to have to migrate around and even leave the country. And in the very first sentence, of the very first paragraph that Jim read, they go, "The Somalian culture has deep-rooted traditions of movement and migration." It's just one thing after the next in this article that's debunking almost the sentence they said directly previous. It's amazing. It's a great one to read if you, have that sense of humor where it's just kind of ironic the whole time. There's a paragraph in the article that goes, "Traditionally, Somali pastoralists have always had resilient ways to deal with changes in rainfall and drought patterns, where families migrate and move on a regular basis, even crossing borders in the process." It's just absurd. The whole article is stupid. I was laughing pretty much the entire time I was reading it. It's hilarious. Anyway, but yeah, the thing that I pointed out on X was that, if climate change is the reason why Somalians are having these crop failures and stuff, why is it that their neighbors, Ethiopia and Kenya, have been seeing improving crop production? Why is it that even Djibouti, which also had a civil war in a similar time frame that Somalia did, has been improving their crop production, but Somalia isn't? Obviously, it's not climate. Anyway, that's my not excitable rant.
It's just, these folks that write these things, they have tunnel vision. They really do, and they even have tunnel vision in their own article. They're so hell-bent on blaming everything on climate change, they forget to look at everything else. And as a result, you get this highly biased, ridiculous statement like what you just read, without any context being put in that makes any sense. And we've seen this time and again in the way that a lot of these folks write these articles. They've got the whole concept of what they're going to write is already predetermined. It's absolutely climate change. And they don't think about looking at any data. They don't think about looking at any history. They don't think about looking outside of that tunnel vision that they're trapped in. And it's hilarious to watch.
Yeah. Oh, look at
By
that.
the way, Jim, I might categorize myself as a climate refugee, getting out of the Northeast in the winter down to Florida, going in search of global warming. So maybe I qualify. But to be serious, I think the mild warming we've had, like, say, since the mid 20th century, has probably had benefits for humanity and life on Earth on net.
Yep, certainly has. I mean, it's a greener planet now. Growing seasons are longer. Increased CO2 is increasing crop yields. I encourage everybody actually to go to climaterealism.com. You can see all sorts of great articles that lay all this out for you. And in fact, I know, Linnea, you did a video on climate refugees in our first round of the Climate at a Glance video series. So you can go right here on our Heartland YouTube channel, look for the Climate at a Glance video series right there. Under playlists, and you can find all sorts of great videos that lay all of this out, but especially the so-called climate refugee problem.
You know, one of the things we haven't really talked about and it flies under the radar, but one of the things pastoralists face, the real problem is they're not allowed to be pastoralists anymore. When their societies, when their cultures were created, there weren't these artificial borders where it's like, this is Somalia and you can't go over here because that's Kenya or that's, X country. No, nomads were traveling all over the place as the rains went, as they needed grasses for their herds. And they can't do that anymore. There are borders with armed people that, tend to frown on you crossing the borders with your livestock when their people have livestock. It's a different world than when these cultures were first created. And that's also a part of the problem that they face.
Yep, for sure. All right. Well, it's really nice to have Linnea's camera back working. And guess what else is back? How's that for a segue, Linnea? What's back is the International Conference on Climate Change, sponsored by the Heartland Institute and our co-host CFAC CO2 Coalition. And what's up with that? It is coming up very soon now. It's only a month away, just a little more than a month away, April 8th and 9th in Washington, D.C. at the Hotel Washington. Seating is limited, so if you want to see Linnea and Sterling and Anthony and maybe even me, but even better than that, all the leading climate scientists in the world, the best policy experts in the world. We are going to have some speakers from the Trump administration who will, in the middle of taking victory laps for what they've done so far in just a year, will be laying out what is next on climate and environment and energy policy from the Trump administration. You do not want to miss it. Go to heartland.org. There's a feature right there where you can click through and get information to get your tickets. April 8th and 9th, 2026 in Washington, D.C. We hope to see you there. All right. I want to get to our guests now, and very happy to have Kevin Mooney along with us. So, Kevin, you have a new book out that we wanted to alert our audience to. It's got a pretty provocative title. It's Climate Porn: How and Why Anti-Population Zealots Fabricate Science While Targeting American Capitalism, Freedom, and Independence. How did you come to write this book, Kevin? And what is the thesis of your book?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of moving parts here. I mean, also, we're talking about, in some cases, dense legalistic subjects when we get into questions of unraveling the endangerment finding and what underpins this climate industrial complex. But sitting on the cusp of 250 years of American independence, I saw an opening for this book because I see a real opportunity here for us to go back to being an independent country and to divorce ourselves from all of these globalist transnational relationships. And I will say one real high water mark for the Trump administration is getting out of this United Nations framework agreement and unwinding us from all these different international agreements. To me, that's a huge birthday gift to the United States coming in. If I had my druthers, I would have us get out of the United Nations altogether. I think Senator Mike Lee actually has a bill to do precisely that. But this is the next best step. What was it that Trump said? I think it was in the 2016 campaign. I represent Pittsburgh, not Paris. The subtext of that is no taxation without representation. So that's why I really saw an opening here, that we have sources for renewal in America that they don't have in Europe. Getting back to our founding ideals and founding principles, there's really nothing out there underpinning this administrative, illicit fourth branch of government in many respects more than the whole climate movement. So my great hope is that we're not just looking at a speed bump along the way to the end of the republic, that we're going to see permanent, enduring changes. But I can't answer that yet. That remains to be seen. But at least there's been some hopeful shifts back in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, the anti-population zealots fabricate science. I mean, this is pretty comprehensive in that the climate movement has been used to basically suppress freedom, wealth, speech, and everything. It's the catch-all movement for government control.
It really is the ultimate in assaults on in the American constitutional order. And I have one chapter in there about how Sheldon Whitehouse and crew, along with Al Gore, attempted to use RICO laws at one point to start going after climate realists, fossil fuel companies. I think it began with Eric Schneiderman up in New York State, if you remember that name, sort of an infamous moment in New York history among many. Sheldon Whitehouse was the tip at the end of that spear, actually wanting to incarcerate and prosecute folks who dissented from his agenda. So in many ways, I think the smallest union in the country is creating a lot of problems with that one U.S. senator who has no appetite for free speech or an open and free debate. But I would say that's broadly true of the whole climate movement.
Yeah, we were among those he targeted.
Oh, you were okay.
Incarceration. Oh, yeah, specifically he named us, he represents this one small union. He is typical of a larger problem of.
Whoops.
Oh, do we lose Sterling?
We lost Sterling a little bit.
White House.
Sheldon's he's in here. He's trying to cut him off.
He's trying. White House swore an oath to do one main thing, which is to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, which upholds and defends free speech.
Sure.
So he directly undercuts his own oath of office when he attempts to lock up people who dissent from his view of climate change or other energy matters.
Sheldon Whitehouse has sent the Heartland Institute several letters over the years, threatening to drag us before Congress and, interrogate us and about our funding, which he thinks comes from big oil, which it doesn't. Those letters are not nothing. It's not something that's appropriate, actually, from a United States senator, as Sterling pointed out, who swears to uphold the Constitution. But the intent of them is to get us to shut up, to be scared. We are not scared. He is not going to shut us up. It's an abuse of his office to even attempt that sort of thing. But it's not surprising. He has had the opportunities. He has been in the majority in the Senate while he's been threatening us and still has done nothing. I actually am encouraging you. I know the president of our organization, James Taylor, is champing at the bit to sit in front of him and give him hell, but we'll see if that ever happens.
Well, the difference now is he doesn't have friends in high places the way he did during back the Obama and Biden years. At that time, there was a group of academics, I think they called them the RICO 20, who signed a letter to the Obama Justice Department asking them to do exactly what White House suggested and start prosecuting people, climate realists, companies, individuals, all under the RICO Act. Now, fortunately, that effort did not get as far as it might have, and it was exposed. But it is a model for what we might see again if these folks get back into power. So I'd like to say that the climate movement is not dead. It might be in its death throes, but there's still a lot of money and organizations standing behind it.
Another influential person who advocated for that is now our Director of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And as you may recall, when he agreed to sign on with Trump, when Trump offered him that, he said, "You quit talking about climate change, you focus on health." And he's done that. But before that, he was one of the foremost proponents of locking them up if they disagree with him on climate change.
Yeah, well, hopefully he's had a coming to Jesus moment. But yes, he has his own checkered history with that. But he does have the magnificent virtue of not being Sheldon Whitehouse, and that does count for something.
Well, that's true. As far as I know, he's never been a part of a club that did not allow minorities.
And he's about 1,000,000 miles away from implementing any climate or energy policy with the Trump administration. He's got his hands full as it is, which is good.
Yep.
I'll describe another episode of in my book too. I have a section in there called California versus America, or something along those lines. There was folks here will be very familiar with the CAFE standards and the California waiver and the whole history behind that. And for once, Republican U.S. senators found their spine, made use of the Congressional Review Act, and yanked out that waiver so Gavin Whitehouse couldn't decide what cars we were going to buy. But remember, that same villain was in play. Sheldon Whitehouse was leading the charge, saying that they have no authority under the Congressional Review Act. What we need now instead is the White House rule, which is what he was going to call it, which would just, of course, re-empower and reinforce all the administrative agencies. So we have dodged some bullets here.
The problem is they're living under the White House rule right now. It's just not Sheldon Whitehouse. It's the White House.
Right.
And they're not liking the results.
That is true. Yeah. I mean, so Kevin, whenever anybody works on a book, obviously writing a book is an enormous challenge for any writer, even an experienced one like you. But you always learn something through the process, even if you think you know the topic really well. What did you learn in your researching and writing your book that you did not know before?
Well, a couple of things. How this all kind of weaves in and fits in together. But what I found, just to give a little bit of good news, moving along as I'm interviewing different subjects, gathering information, there is an honorable tradition of conservation and environmentalism as it's defined in the dictionary. And my own feeling is beginning sometime in the 1970s, when this command and control approach, started to gain traction, they hijacked that terminology. And what I found is there's maybe a little bit of a failure on our side in terms of terminology. The climate environmental activists, to me, are really just anti-use, anti-energy, anti-human people. And we're the conservationists and environmentalists in every sense of the word. Nothing they advocate is actually good for the climate. And I do see some indications, especially with this battle over offshore wind, just to cite one example out of many, that you see a broad coalition of residents and citizens coming together to realize that whenever they want to go out and do something in the way of conservation or preservation or protect their landscapes from wind farms, they're running against these well-funded, well-heeled climate/environmental activist groups. And it just raises some interesting questions about who are the real conservationists here. And I found that along the way, there's an opportunity here, I think, to reframe the debate, maybe in a way we haven't been as aggressive as we should. That was one lesson.
Very good. Well, you can go ahead, Sterling. Go ahead.
In that battle, what you find is what's, I think, very common elsewhere across the country is often it's elites, the grass tops, saying we need to do this, and it's actually undercutting or against the true grassroots. People on the ground are going to suffer from these things.
True. All right. Well, you can get Kevin's book everywhere you might get books, especially Amazon.com. Kevin J. Mooney, the book is Climate Porn, How and Why Anti-Population Zealots Fabricate Science While Targeting American Capitalism, Freedom, and Independence, as it always is with them. So congratulations on the book, Kevin, and very happy to have you on here today. Stick with us. We have Q&A coming up, so maybe there'll be some questions for you.
Okay.
But before we get to that, I want to make a quick announcement, and that is I alluded earlier to the video series that starred Linnea Lucan. How many views do we have on that overall, Andy? Several million. He'll put it in the chat here pretty soon. But it was the Climate at a Glance video series, enormously successful, and it's based on the book Climate at a Glance, of which a second edition is out. You can go get that as well. Linnea was up here in Northern Illinois, the Chicago area, in our offices this week to record a new set of videos, or at least beginning a new set of videos on energy. You want to tell people a little bit about that, Linnea?
Sure thing. These will be the same sort of videos, like really short ones, a minute to 5 minutes, I think, probably less than 5 minutes, maybe even less than 3 minutes most of the time. And they'll just be covering really, really briefly different energy topics. So instead of trying to do, like I've done in the past, an entire video about everything having to do with wind power, we've broken them down into really short segments. So there'll be a video on wind and the environment. So like wind and its impact on animals and stuff. And then we'll have an entire video that's just wind and the turbine graveyard issue, wind and its cost. So brief overviews. I can't cover everything on the planet, but we are trying to get as close as we can. So yeah, they'll be up on. Thank you very much, Jay Wester. For your question here, which is where can we find the videos? All of the Climate at a Glance videos are on the Heartland YouTube channel. I'm not sure if we have secondary places that they're stored. They might be also on Rumble. Andy can tell me that. And then we also are going to be putting all of the Energy at a Glance videos as they come up on our Facebook, on our Twitter, on our YouTube, on our Rumble. So they will be posted all over the place. Oh, Andy is telling me that our our Climate at a Glance videos are on YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble.
Right, and all combined, they got about 15 million-ish, as Andy says, views on the first round. So that's fantastic. But yeah, we have a whole playlist at the Heartland Institute YouTube channel. Very easy to find. Just search Heartland Institute. If you're watching this video, actually, you should subscribe to our channel. Then you would know exactly where it is. You'd be able to find it very easily. So please do that. And we will have a whole new playlist for this new Energy at a Glance series as well. Those will start rolling out as early as the next 7 to 10 days, and they'll be coming out on a regular schedule, so they'll be fantastic. And also point out, this is a collaborative effort by the Robinson Center for Climate and Environment Policy at the Heartland Institute, which includes Anthony Watts and Sterling Burnett and Linnea. They all worked on the scripts together. James Taylor, our president, also weighed in. And of course, Andy Singer, our producer here, did a fantastic job getting all the setup for the videos, professional production work. So it's going to be great, and you're going to want to share them with all your family and friends. And so keep your eye out for that. I look forward to bringing that to the world. One other thing that we'd like to bring to the world is word about the sponsor of this program, and that is Advisor Metals. If you listen to a lot of conservative shows like I do, you hear a ton of pitches for buying gold and silver and other precious metals. There are a ton of companies out there that will give you that, but we want to tell you why you should trust our sponsor, Advisor Metals, and that's the man who runs the company, Ira Bershatsky. He is the managing member of Advisor Metals, and he does not employ those high-pressure tactics or deceptive marketing ploys like many in big gold. He also doesn't deal in so-called rare coins. When you buy gold and other precious metals from Advisor Metals, you're going to be dealing in quality bullion, and that is so much better when it comes time to liquidate this very valuable physical asset. And when you buy from Advisor Metals, you will have your investment sent discreetly and directly to your very home. Ira is advertising on the Climate Realism show with the Heartland Institute because he, like us, is an America First patriot. He does not donate to Democrats. He refuses to work with proxies of the Chinese Communist Party. And he, like us, abhor the machinations and schemes of the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. And we are very proud to have Ira and Advisor Metals as a sponsor. So if you want to diversify your investment portfolio, or if you want to back up your IRA with real physical bullion of precious metals, go to climaterealismshow.com/metals. You can leave your information there, and Ira will make this process very easy for you. Again, that's climaterealismshow.com/metals, and be sure to tell them who sent you, because that helps us while you're helping your financial future. All right. Thank you for your attention to this matter. It is time now for Q&A. Linnea, take it away.
All right. Sounded like an echo there for a second. Anyway, from Mars Rock, Sterling, I'm pitching this one to you. If the globe warms and more people have AC, what's the problem?
That's a good
None.
question. I see no problem. The globe may warm a modest amount, But if you're living in a climate controlled environment most of the time, it won't affect you at all. And if you're outside in it and it's an extra degree warmer, it also likely won't affect you at all. The globe warming has nothing to do with whether you have AC. AC is a product of wealth and innovation, and people are clamoring for it because it makes life more comfortable and better. And I advocate as many people getting, adopting air conditioning as fast as they are, as fast as their wealth and infrastructure allows it.
I would point out that the majority of people right now live in climate controlled conditions. The exception to the rule is people that live in mud huts like they do in Somalia.
But they live in a different climate control. They're controlled by the climate, but we want to artificially control it through air conditioning. And, thank God I have it today. It's running right now. We're sitting in our 80s here in Texas. So spring's come early.
Yep.
Alrighty. I've got this one for Anthony. This is kind of a theoretical question here from Albert, frequent viewer of ours. Thanks for being here, Albert. He says, David Dilley says that climate is being driven by natural climate pulse cycles from the Earth, Moon, and Sun. He forecasts a global cooling cycle starting in 2030 caused by global ocean cooling cycles. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is something that we have dealt with time and time and time again on whatsupwiththat.com. It's called barycentrism. And there's this belief that the alignments of the planets and their centers of gravity and all this stuff converge and make these pulses. Well, we've looked at this deeply, and there's no evidence for it, just none. And so, going to be a global cooling cycle by 2030. I give that as much credence as the 1989 prediction by the UN that entire nations are going to disappear into the sea.
Yeah, the hardest thing, guys, about this stuff is that nobody knows. And making predictions like this, I mean, it would be respectable if by 2030, the people who make these kinds of predictions were to admit that they're wrong if it doesn't turn out the way that they say it's going to turn out. But that pretty much never happens on either side of the equation here.
That's true. That's a good point. And we go back to what Dr. Judith Curry said a long time ago. Climate is a wicked problem. It is a very chaotic system. Predicting the outcome of a chaotic system often is no better than a dice roll. It's just that bad. It's just difficult, very difficult to predict. And as Yogi Berra said, it's often difficult to make predictions, especially about the future.
Here's a great comment to that effect from our frequent viewer, Tech, who says, if climate astrology is an on-ramp to climate realism, I'll take it. Yeah, we'll take it too. Alrighty. William Schugart says, if not for climate change, would Somalia be a paradise? Which is, no, I don't think so.
We're getting some really sarcastic questions today. Yeah.
Our viewers know us too well.
I can't even imagine what it would take for Somalia to be a paradise at this.
Jim, you're muted.
He pulled a Jim. The first
Jim pulls a Jim. What a shock. Yeah, I was going to say some of the most beautiful places on earth are run by some of the most terrible people on earth, unfortunately.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Kite Man Music asks, will there be a financial boost when they stop spending on renewable energy products or projects? Anybody who wants it?
Well, I would say,
except for Sterling, who's
it's not just that they should stop spending. Government needs to get out of it. Let markets. Government needs to get out of it and let markets determine where spending should be. People should put their money into the technologies. If you want to solar power on your house, that's fine. That's fine. But you should pay for it. Let the market decide where people want to put their money, or let people decide through the market, not be directed by government. I suspect that what you'll have is you'll have spending in a different direction and more productive direction, because it'll be satisfying people's expressed wants rather than government's believed what you should want.
Absolutely. Oh, this is a question with regards to our upcoming conference from Jerry, who says, will you be live streaming for those of us who can't attend? Yes, we will. We will be live streaming to all of the usual places. So if you hate YouTube, you can watch it on Rumble or X. And if you want to be involved in like a live chat, like we usually have for these shows, that will also be available on YouTube. So
we're also doing a live, this show is always live every week, but we're going to be doing a live with an audience, a live audience at the climate conference of this program during the conference. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yep, live and in person. So that'll be cool. Alrighty. Yeah, and Ryan Mellinson asked the same thing, same answer. Okay. Engineer Guy asks, what might AI offer on climate change? Predictions on that? What do you think, Kevin?
I'm going to offer up Virginia as a little test bed for that, because one of our speakers here mentioned, I think it was Sterling, about going back into the RGGI carbon tax agreement in Virginia. Virginia is becoming a big corridor for AI, and I don't see how they're going to be able to accommodate that inescapably rising demand of energy. So I think there's going to be a real coming to Jesus moment there, and I think AI might help put a lie to some of these climate change schemes that are just not going to work in terms of what the energy demands actually are. Yeah, and Spangenberger is going to help us get there. It's going to be a lot of a painful process along the way, but I think that's Exhibit A for where this is going.
If there is a virtue to AI beyond whatever uses it really has, I'm still not convinced that the intelligence part of it is that intelligence as opposed to being artificial. But it's that the people who are pushing AI the most, the big tech moguls, for years pushed renewable energy, wind and solar onto the grid, saying we know best. It's, the climate is changing. We want to prevent this. Now they're the biggest cheerleaders for natural gas and increasingly nuclear power, because they've come to realize, hold it, we want to win the AI race, and we can't do that with intermittent power. We've been wrong, they're admitting. Bill Gates wrote a whole book saying, I was wrong. Climate change is still happening, but it's not a disaster. And but what's a disaster is me not having power for my AI data centers. So they're now on our side for once.
Yep. All right. This is a question that I'm going to have to carefully puzzle out for a second here, because it seems that it was written with much enthusiasm and a little bit of spelling errors and maybe just a little bit of computer going crazy while they're typing it. But this is from Peter, who says, when will bills start coming down for utilities on the expensive net zero, now that the expensive net zero regs are being removed? Is there eventually going to be a 0%, I don't know what CUI cost is?
I don't know, but I can answer it in partial words if you like.
Peter, if you can repost your question and kind of fix your spelling, it might help us a little bit for the second half. But for the first half, saying, when will bills start coming down for utilities now that the expensive net zero regulations are being removed?
I would say that that's not likely to ever happen, because once a price point is established, it's very, very difficult to get it removed. Utilities, especially ones that have shareholders like PG&E of California, they just live for these things. They live for these price increases, and so trying to get it to come down, that's going to require some heavy duty pressure, either from government or shareholders, and that's not likely to happen.
Yeah, I would say that, in fact, if you look at inflationary pressures across the economy, generally what you find historically is prices go up unless you hit deflation, which is bad. Prices don't go down. They just rise slower in the future as you get rid of these net zero things. In addition, you got to remember, first, utilities are wedded. The government may not be in net zero, but many of these utilities are wedded to net zero. They have made long-term investments and are still making long-term investments in wind and solar and claiming we need to have net zero. So they haven't given up.
Yeah, Sterling's video is mismatched just a little bit to his sound. like an old kung fu movie, as Tex says in the chat. But
No,
we're
a Godzilla film. A Godzilla film. Those are my favorites.
yeah, a Godzilla film.
And apparently Sterling's internet is powered by a single tiny windmill outside his house, and it's not blowing right now, so he's screwed.
You know, I've noticed that this has started happening once I've boosted to the 720 as opposed to what I was at before. Maybe I need to go back. I don't know. I know everyone else is 1080. Don't get me wrong. I know that, but.
All right. So Tex says, this is for Kevin. Does any story stand out from the people in the book unfairly penalized by policy ideology?
Yeah, in many ways, it is a book about victims. The left is very big on victimhood, and there are people who have lost their livelihoods, their property rights, their reputations, all because of this aggressive effort to either silence them or deplatform them. I do tell a story of a no less than a former Navy veteran who was actually incarcerated and put in prison for running up against the EPA and their clean water rules. I think he wanted to build a pond on his lawn, and this gets into complicated questions of what is a connecting waterway, which has been litigated all over the place. But the point is that this poor fellow was just no match for the well-heeled special interests, very well dialed into federal agencies, and it gets into what happens when constitutional government collapses, which unfortunately we lived through that period. So there's a long list of victims, of honest academics, scientists, average people who have been victimized by the climate/environmental movements. I don't know if one stands out, but that's one that I remember because this poor fellow, I think, actually died in prison. You know, he I think in many ways opened some doors for leveling the playing field, but he did it at a terrible high cost.
Absolutely. Thank you. All righty. This is a question regarding our wonderful sponsor, Advisor Metals, from our friend, I think Mike Johansson, I can't remember what your first name is. Once you took it out of he used to have it in his name, and I've forgotten what it is now that he's taken it out. I'm sorry, man. But he says, is the gold sustainable and not carved out by children? Jim?
I don't believe it is not carved out by children.
Yeah, it's not artesian. So there's that.
No,
I'm not sure the Congo, where child labor is the real problem for mining, is they're getting any gold out of there. That's for cobalt.
Yes, cobalt is a precious metal, but not this kind of precious metal.
All right.
Kevin says in our private chat he has to go. He has to go for another interview.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
if anybody, let me see if there's any other questions for you. Not specifically, but I'm going to bring up this. Let's see. If anybody in the chat has another question for Kevin, we need to get to it quick. I have not seen another one posted. But I will bring up from Ray Quazza, who says, hey, Heartland, read your report on air conditioners and climate change. Are temperature controls on air conditioning adding to the cost, and are they authoritarian? So, well, Kevin, this is kind of has to do too with some of the just like government over-regulation and everything on all of our utilities and all of our at-home appliances and everything.
Yeah, well, I think you can't really separate higher costs from centralized planning. You know, there have been cases when government officials actually control your thermostats, and think about that being extrapolated out. We've decided that, well, you can't have the heat that high, or you know, or that cool. We'll decide what's right. So I think unfortunately, I look at it this way. Everything is inside the climate. Everything's inside the environment. So, of course, if you're a regulator, that's a great narrative angle, you know, just to seize on, you know, who can step outside of the climate, generally speaking. None of us can. It's all about regulating human behavior.
Anthony, did you have something?
I was going to say that, you know, the advent of these smart thermostats does add a cost to AC, you know, setups if it's included with the AC you're purchasing. A lot of times utilities try to give them away for free because then they get the added advantage of being able to control your thermostat when they want to. Me personally, I have had 2 different smart thermostats that I've checked out. I've removed them, and I now use a dumb thermostat because I don't want the utility companies to be controlling what I experience in my home.
And I have a
Absolutely.
semi-smart thermostat. If it's not dictated by government, I'm not sure that they add much to the cost. Air conditioners have always had controls. It's just the smart things connected to the grid. Mine cycles both upper end and lower end based on temperatures that I set, but it's not connected to my utility telling me or to the government telling me what temperatures to set.
All right, and Kevin has to get going here. But Kevin, do you have any other books coming up or anything that you want to plug for our audience before you have to take off?
Well, there will be another book project, but I would say that all the people on this call and the organization standing behind them just did a tremendous job of heavy lifting to help level the playing field over these past few decades. I don't think we got here by accident. I think this is a tough fight, and I'd like to think that there really is an opportunity for us to really swing back to, the old historical American Constitution and not allow these transnational global figures to call all the shots. Whether it's climate change and the environment, I think collectivists and communists will find another rationale. So it's an ongoing fight, but I think right now we're actually winning this one.
Awesome.
Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, thank you all.
All right. I have two more questions from our audience that I want to get to from us. Brian Porter has asked both on Rumble and on the YouTube channel, how clean has coal electricity production become compared to 20 years ago? And that's a great question because this is actually something I cover in one of my upcoming energy at a glance videos. So since around 1990, between 1990 and 2021, the particulate matter from coal plants has declined by 99.8%, which is basically all of it. Nitrogen oxides have been reduced by 83%, sulfur dioxide by 98%, and the entire coal sector in general reduced emissions of sulfur dioxide by 93% instead of just by the plant level, but the entire sector. So it's all up in the 90% range. So it is basically fixed the pollution problem from coal.
That's great, and that's something that a lot of the activists never pay attention to. They just label it as dirty coal, and that's the end of the story. Again, they don't want to look at facts. They don't want to do research. They just want to spout their slogans out there.
Okay, and the final question I'm going to leave us off on here, guys, is from Peter again. He's trying to fix his keyboard situation. He said, be nice to my keyboard. This is a genuine question. What is the point if the bills don't come down?
Well, the point is you continue to have choice because the bills don't keep rising faster. Some bills will come down. Look, gas prices go up and down, and when gas prices go down, it's reflected in the price at the pump. Am I offline again? I see Linnea talking.
No, I had to mute myself. I've got a landscaper here now, and my dog is barking.
Okay, I thought she was saying, there goes Sterling. So, some prices will come down, but overall, generally what happens when you get rid of these regs is some of the prices are already built in. If I built a wind power plant, you're paying for that for 30 years. That's not going away. It's already built in, but you can prevent new wind industrial facilities, new solar facilities. You can keep prices from rising as fast as they did before.
Yeah. Hey, Linnea, regarding your dog, I would like to suggest that you train your dog so that anytime the words Al Gore are uttered, he starts barking. And then anytime the words Greta Thunberg are uttered, he starts whining.
Yeah. Well, I thought...
How dare you?
Woof indeed. Yeah, I thought you were just going to start at, here's my suggestion, or stop at train your dog. And that is an impossible task anyway. So, but I also wanted to point out, I forgot before the start of the Q&A that Sterling missed the memo that today was Black Frame Glasses Day. And he got left out. I was just looking at the group of us with Kevin, and we're all wearing like thin black frame glasses. Anyway, yeah, that is all the questions that I have from the audience here today.
Now I feel right in.
Whoa,
You look like you're from the Matrix.
It's like Dr. Robotnik from the Sonic franchise. All right, I'm going to pass it off to Jim here. Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, thank you, Linnea. Thank you, Morpheus. Thank you, Anthony Watts. Thank you to the audience for being here with us today, especially in the chat. It's so much fun that we have every week right here on the Climate Realism Show. I want to remind you again, we have our climate conference coming up. It's a month away now, April 8th and 9th in Washington, D.C. Go to heartland.org and then click through on the feature for the climate conference and get your tickets. I want to thank our streaming partners, Junk Science, CFACT, CO2 Coalition, Climate Depot, What's Up With That, and Heartland UK Europe. Thank you, Andy Singer, behind the scenes, doing such a fantastic job producing this show every single week. And we will talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.